Hello there, everyone. I've been messing around in the Risk of Rain 2 anniversary update, which came out just a couple days ago, and in the midst of sort of the fervor of experiencing the update for the first time, and in lieu of some more complex, well-edited videos summarizing the more substantive changes of the patch, I went through the patch notes. It took about an hour or so to go through all the patch notes and sort of give my thoughts on stuff that I thought was major. There's a lot of very small changes in the anniversary update that were really impactful. So I'm just gonna have probably just some Bandit gameplay, some random gameplay in the background. This is more of a podcast sort of format, so feel free to tab out and just take a listen if you'd like. And I hope you think my perspective is at least different or something you didn't think about before. And I hope you enjoy your time. If you do enjoy your time, I'd appreciate it if you leave a like, maybe comment, tell me that I'm doing a good job. But that's all. That'll all come in the end. So I'm just going to go through the patch notes and say things as they become relevant, and give an example of each of them. Some of the first new things that they added the account stats page, which I actually really, really like. They had this in the first game, and I was really surprised that I didn't see it in the second game until just recently. I really like the way that they present the pie chart, where it shows how many times you've won with characters, how many times you've picked characters, and then all of the rundowns, like which enemies killed you the most, what your favorite equipment item is. It's like a lot of really fun stuff. I really like seeing stats like that. Just being able to see your stats and how many times you've actually played a character really, it's a lot of fun. And seeing like, oh, I haven't played a lot of Rex, maybe I'll play a little bit of Rex is always pretty fun. The new lunar items they added and the new boss items they added are all really good. They finally completed the Heresy set, which replaces your abilities on your survivor with different abilities. And I'm really, really, really interested in both the Mouse 2, the Hooks of Heresy, and especially the Essence of Heresy, which replaces your R. Both of those are really, really solid abilities on a lot of characters. Like, I would definitely take Hooks of Heresy on Engineer. I don't think that the landmines are that important to the playstyle, and I think that having that sort of blade vortex, that does just an absolute monster amount of damage, if you manage to land it right on top of someone. I think that's really, really valuable for Engineer, who is a class that typically has a bit more trouble dealing with direct damage because they have to do so much setup for it. None of the new boss items. I've only seen the Empathy Cores and the Planula. I've not seen the Charged Perforator because I'm not crazy enough to fight an Overloading Worm. There are the three new boss items. The Empathy Cores are really, really fun, and it sort of lumps into this universal change that I'll get into later, so I suppose I'll talk about that later when we get to the universal changes to minions. But the Empathy Cores are really fun. They summon these two little Solace probes, like how you have the friendly beetle guards, and those actually scale based on your total amount of allies, which is like minions and ghosts from Happiest Mask and squid polyps and engineer turrets and other players. Like, they scale based on the size of your party list, which is, I think, really, really cool. And I was really hoping for more incentives to pick up drones and stuff, other than just I am playing captain, so I'm the guy who picks up the drones. And I think that the Empathy Cores really do a good job of incentivizing that, through more than just the abilities that the drones themselves have. Like, if you get Empathy Cores, you can build more closely around minions on any character. And I think having items that really change the way that you think about a run after you get them is really important for keeping the game fresh. And they did a really good job with that. The Planula is sort of a bit of a nothing item, if I'm being honest. It heals you for flat 15 health every time you get damaged, which is like kind of a little bit like having 3 repulsion armor plates. The important thing, as with repulsion armor plates, is that this works against damage over time. It's also healing. Oh, okay, hold on. No, okay, so if you take the Planula and then you pick up a Hellfire Tincture, because Hellfire Tincture only does 1 damage to you repeatedly, it would heal you for 14 each tick. So it would turn the Hellfire Tincture from something that hurts you actively into something that heals you over time, which would potentially be really, really strong, especially with razor wire synergy. Like in a previous video, I did razor wire only engineer run. And the Planula would be really, really strong with that strategy because getting a little bit of healing on that is pretty good. But in situations outside of like specific crafted synergies, like if you just pick up a Planula on an average run, you're not going to be sad about it, but it's not going to dramatically affect the way you do the run going forward, and it's not going to dramatically affect the way you like play. It's just going to be something that sits on your passive and just makes you just that tiny little bit tankier, which is always welcome, but it's not a very interesting item from a mechanical standpoint. The next thing up in the patch notes is the new skill variants. I haven't unlocked all of them, but I have read a lot about the ones that I haven't seen, and I have some friends who main Multi and Mercenary who have unlocked their alternate skills. So I have seen gameplay of those, and I'll be talking about that. The new Multi special, like obviously Multis are default is retool. It replaces your weapon. So now you have sort of a siege mode where you hunker down and you pull out both weapons instead of switching between them, and you like have reduced movement, but the damage reduction on it is absolutely bonkers. Like, my friend was using siege mode pretty much all the time, and I was watching him just face tank 4 or 5 stone golem lasers with dual nail guns just because of one harvester scythe and one leeching seed, and it can just power through all of that damage because the damage reduction from that siege mode is so dramatic. And I think it really opens up sort of a like a brick wall full-on tank playstyle for Multi in a way that was always sort of possible. Multi always had the highest base HP and the best HP scaling, so you could take good advantage of damage reduction already. But having that sort of built-in core functionality to reduce damage by that much, especially as it still enables you to do all of your damage, and it doesn't have a duration. You can just do it. I think that it's a really, 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 really strong option. And it'll be interesting to see over the course of the next couple weeks or so, as people learn more about the update, what sorts of weapon combinations will work best on the siege mode. Because my friend only ever ran nail gun and scrap cannon or double nail gun. I never saw like double rebar or anything involving saws. And both of those seem like really interesting, if not very viable, or like preferable, I should say, options to the default multi-special. Okay, the next new skill variant is an alternate utility for the Mercenary. It's a much, much more damaging. I think it's 700% damage versus the default 300 or so. Let me quickly check the wiki for that. But it also automatically applies exposure. And exposure is like really, really, really good. Okay, yeah, here we go. So blinding assault. So the alternate dash is 2 1/3 of the default dashes all at once, but it doesn't have the triple charge mechanic that the default one does. So you have a little bit fewer iframes. You aren't relying on your invincibility frames as heavily with your alternate dash, and you aren't like, I don't think it stuns either. So it's a much more aggressive option, and I think that it can work just fine. I never found the 3 charges on the dash particularly useful, but I also don't play a lot of Mercenary, so I might be mistaken in some functionality there. And perhaps the fact that it applies the exposure after 1 second means that you can like blade beam someone, and that applies exposure. You dash through them to pop the exposure, and then it reapplies it after 1 second. That seems really, really strong. Like reducing your cooldowns by 2 flat seconds and dealing like 600 something % extra damage is really, really strong. And I'll probably be experimenting with that once I actually unlock it. The new Rec special, the new Loader special, and the new Captain utility are things that I haven't personally seen. And I have almost no experience with Rex. Rex is easily the character I have the least experience on. So I can't really comment too heavily on how Rex's new special changes their playstyle. But the thing that intrigues me is that apparently, if an enemy dies while under the effect of Rex's alternate special, they drop a fruit that heals for 25%. And that seems pretty strong. Like, especially in a team scenario when you can share that with your friends, that seems like a really, really good supportive ability. And even in solo, having consistent healing has always been Rex's biggest strength in my view. So having an option on your special to heal a little bit more bursty, if not as much as you could potentially get out of the default special, I think it offers some compelling options, and I'll be interested to experiment with it once I unlock it and see if maybe something about Rex makes more sense after I get that. But I have a lot of work to do on Rex in general still. The new loader special looks really, really cool. You like slam on the ground, and it's got this big AoE, and it stuns, and I bet it does a good amount of damage. And that seems like a pretty good option to me, other than, as opposed to, I should say, Loader's alternate R, or Loader's standard R, because Loader's standard R is really useful as a mobility tool, like as an extra grapple point to grapple to in open areas. It's really, really, really valuable. But I find that the damage itself is not too great. The concern that I do have with potentially replacing it, though, is that your alternate Loader special is a ground slam. And so you are sacrificing Loader's already pretty mediocre ability to deal with aerial enemies in a big way. So you're going to be relying a little bit more on pivoting into Visions of Heresy in order to really get, in order to really have a comfy time dealing with like wisps and jellyfish and like the various flying annoyances. But overall, I think that the idea, because I use the alternate loader punch, I use the thunder punch rather than the charged punch. I really like the idea of like swinging into a thing, bouncing off a guy, getting all the dudes behind him with the lightning off the punch, and then just slamming down on him to finish him off. That sounds like it's going to be an absolute blast once I get down to it, and I'm really excited to experiment a little bit with that. And the new Captain Utility variant, I think, is incredibly funny. I think it's really, really cool. I think it's very funny, and I think it's almost unusable, and that's the coolest part. It's a 20-second channel. Like, not channel per se, like as in you have to stand there and like channel it to cast it, but it's like a 20-second timer. And then at the end of that 20-second timer, it does the single highest base damage value in the game by a really large margin. So you just get, like, it is a nuke. You just nuke the guy, and it looks so cool, and it looks so fun to experiment with, and I guarantee you that it will not be worth running over the default, because that like 4,500, like that 4,500%, just like bam, 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 every like 10 seconds or so, is probably going to be a lot more valuable than that chance at doing 40,000% to something specific. You know, I feel like having the other Captain utility just as a little more of an agile option is pretty good. Although Captain's Mouse 1 is really, really, really strong. So, you know, it may be worth giving up the utility slot just to rely on the Mouse 1 a little more, because it's really strong. And you can probably get away with it. Because, you know, like, you don't need it in the void fields and all that. Like, you don't really need it in the hidden realms. People started complaining about that in 1.0, but I think over time we all sort of realized that it's not that much of a downside, all things considered. Okay, only one new monster type, and it comes with a new elite type. The new monster type is only on the final stage. They added like a ball variant, like a skittery little ball dude, to the Lunar Chimera family. And they have some characteristics of the most annoying enemies in the game, which is swell. Thanks, Hopoo. They have their projectiles are like whatever. The really important thing is that they're really small, and they're pretty cheap in terms of spawn budget, so they're fairly numerous. And when they die, they leave behind puddles, sort of like the mini mushrooms, that do percentage health damage. So at any stage in the game, they're always going to do a pretty decent chunk of damage, and they spawn quite a few of them, and the radius is pretty big. So when you're going through the new stage 6 and you're doing the holdouts at the 4 pillars, or potentially, I'm not sure if they can even spawn during the loadout after the final boss, or not the loadout, the holdout after the final boss, just because they spawn so many Void Reavers now. They used to spawn like a couple Void Reavers on the way back, but now they like really hammer you with them in the finale. And I think it blocks all of the Lunar Chimera from spawning. So luckily, you don't have to deal with as many of them in your final holdout. But they are certainly, like, all of the Lunar Chimera types, especially the golems, got a lot more dangerous with this update, especially because of the new Perfected Elite type, which I'll get to in just a moment. But these ball dudes, like, they're really... Like, I think the first run where we got to the new final stage, I was with a couple friends, and the two of us that died both died to these balls. So they're a real ass threat, and they're pretty hard to see. They're almost like Wisp-like in that way, where they're kind of hard to pick out of a crowd, but if you see one that's like an elite type, or you just see a big group of them, you'll want to take care of them pretty quick, or else they can really pile up and become a real threat. The new elite type is Perfected, and the most obvious thing about a Perfected enemy is that they are all shields, like as if you'd picked up Transcendence as a player. They are all shields. And I have not personally confirmed this. This is all things that I've experienced, so it may be wrong, but I didn't double check the wiki, and I'm not going to because it's fun. I'm 90% sure that perfected enemies do not activate on hit item effects. Like if you hit them, it can't bleed, it can't crit, it can't attach sticky bombs, it can't do ukuleles. Like, maybe, I'm not sure, maybe it just sets the procs to 0 if you hit them, and you just can't proc anything. Because I was playing the secret character, whose passive is that their health regen turns into health degen, and they have lifesteal every time they hit an enemy. And I was not getting lifesteal off of perfected enemies, which leads me to believe that they ignore on-hit effects of all kinds, not just from items. So perfected enemies can be... I find that they're not too much of a problem to take down, other than just the innate like health and damage boosts by virtue of being an elite in and of itself. And I've only ever seen a perfected enemy on the moon, on the final stage. I do not believe they are able to spawn in standard conditions, unless maybe you get like 2 or 3 loops deep, and then they start spawning. But I've never seen one in a normal game. The next thing up on the docket is the new boss, the Grandparent. We touched on the item before, the Planula. The Grandparent has been in the game files forever. At least as long as I've been aware of this game, which granted isn't too long. I came in after like Hidden Realms, I think. My first new character was Captain. I haven't been here for too long. As long as I've known about Risk 2 in any real detail, the Grandparent has been in the game files. And now they're in the game, and they look completely different. Their item is completely different. Like, the one that was in the files might as well not exist anymore. I really, really, really like the new Grandparent. Even if I think they are a tiny bit big, they seem a little bit unwieldy for the engine to handle. Like, just placing them places and, like, moving them around seems a little bit cumbersome. But I really dig the aesthetic of the Grandparent, and I really dig their attacks, like... the energy that they channel, and like throwing a sun over their head for a big old radial damage over time skill, you know. It like if you get a Milky Chrysalis and you're flying around, you're dodging laser balls and you're throwing shit back at it, it really feels like some big anime boss fight, and I really dig that. And I like, it's appropriate because they only spawn where parents can spawn, and parents are already pretty big annoyances. So the Grandparent is pretty fun to deal with, and it really has a sense of scale to it that not a lot of the other bosses do. Especially now that they've toned down the effects that the magma worm puts on your screen for performance reasons, which was very warranted. But it means that the magma worm is a little less dramatic when it spawns. But I feel like the grandparent has that sense of drama to it, you know. All right, and next thing is just the Lunar Shop refresher. You can re-roll the Lunar Shop. It's neat. A lot of new lore. Just a whole lot of new lore. Just basically, I don't know, I'm pretty sure now that every single thing in the game has some kind of logbook entry. Most of them do not matter. Like 80 to 90% of what they added in the lore entries is just like fun, you know, and that's cool. That's always been how it is, you know. But a couple things like the logbook entry for the new character really spoke to me because, or not the new character, not Bandit, the secret character. The secret character, the logbook entry for the secret character reveals that they snuck onto the contact light, which for those of you who are not familiar with Risk of Rain lore, which is probably most of you, the contact light is the ship from the first game that crashed with Commando on it to sort of put the whole events of the series into motion. And Risk 1 isn't really interested in explaining that at all. So the secret character's logbook entry details how she snuck onto the contact light to try and get away from Providence. And Providence was chasing her when the contact light went down in the first game. And that has some really fun lore implications because of like there's some things with the way the model looks and a couple of the background details. Like if you look into the Heresy logbook entries, there's some stuff, and then like the whole sort of situation with Providence and Mithrix and Nuka-Hana, and then like that their relation to the things on the planet as a whole, like a lot of things potentially given enough time to sort of chew on it could click into place in a really cool way in the near future. And I might make a more substantial video on like what I think the overall storyline of Risk of Rain is like, because in research for a much larger project that will eventually come out, I swear, I looked into a lot of the lore entries, and there's some really, really fun stuff to be found with like Mithrix and Providence and all that. So look forward to a video potentially summarizing at least what I've gleaned from the logbook entries. They've stated themselves at Hopoo that the logbook is mostly just there for fun. You know, like people like the lore, and they write the lore for people to like. You know, it's not that complicated. So I'll have some fun with it. Right. Okay. So now we get into some of the more nuanced stuff. The final stage has been redone entirely. That's something I've touched on before, but it's a really big improvement. In general, the theme of this update to me is going back and giving some attention to things that were fine but could have used improvements. And the final stage is one of the big deal changes here, because the final stage pre-anniversary update was basically just a long walk to the boss without much incentive to like stay by and fight the enemies and like actually really engage with the stage. It was mostly just a preamble. And now like the final stage is a proper stage with like real mechanics and some like fun new stuff to explore. And they updated the visuals there to be a lot more detailed, and there's a lot of fun little environmental stuff, like how where the lunar buds are, or at least where they used to be, they have like hanging bits of the lunar chimeras hanging around, and that sort of implies that that's where they like put the pieces together. You know, like there's a lot of little environmental details, like there's a sword stuck in the ground just randomly somewhere near one of the jump pads that takes you up to Mithrix. And I'm not sure if that's a sword that Mithrix used to wield that matches his brother's sword, Providence, or if that is a form of Providence's sword that he has taken from Providence. But that sounds like fun. And the potential to have like extra stuff going on there for future expansions excites me. And I like the final stage just feels so much infinitely better. It looks way cooler. It has a sense of scale to it that it didn't have before, and it's just generally a lot better. The low health threshold has been increased to 25%. I think this is mostly just for the rework to how Old War Stealth Kit functions. Old War Stealth Kit now always procs when you hit 25%, and has a cooldown, as opposed to just being an RNG chance when you got hit with no cooldown. And I haven't noticed a dramatic difference, but it just means that Stealth Kit is better, more consistent at doing what it was always doing, which is getting you out of the way if you take a nasty hit. And yeah, so that I would imagine that's where the low health threshold is, and I bet that means that the Wandering Vagrant will also now use its Nova attack 5% earlier, which is not super important, but is worth noting. They mention here that all AI now have dramatically improved pathfinding. Our results have varied in my personal group of players. In general, like Magma Worm doesn't seem to go crazy as much anymore, which is sweet. But I haven't tested that too thoroughly. Enemy pathfinding seems to be just as fine as it's always been. I've never had too many issues with that, so I haven't noticed a dramatic difference there. What I have noticed is that drones are a little bit funky now. They're much more prone to hovering into you and hovering close to you. And I've had times, like, for example, when I was unlocking achievements for Bandit, and I was trying to get Bandit's alternate mouse 1 attack, which requires you to reset the cooldown using his R 15 times in a row. I would have times where a healing drone would wander right in front of my cursor as it was going off and break my streak. And I would appreciate if there was less of that. And I've also had an instance of a friend who was trying to get someplace. I don't remember exactly what the context was. They were trying to get somewhere. They were trying to pick an item in a command run or something. And the drone literally flew under their feet, and they floated away on top of their drone. So, like, the AI pathfinding in general seems to be totally fine, but the drone pathfinding needs a little bit of work to just ensure that they stay, they don't become a nuisance. Because they're, in my experience, they're being a little bit more of an active nuisance, especially if you're just standing still right now. Speaking of drones, they had a really, really, really big change to drones. Drones, Squid Polyp, Happiest Mask, like all of the like purchasable or summonable quote unquote minions, and this includes the probes from the new yellow item. They all scale with the ambient level of the run, which is the internal, internal number that the game uses to scale the enemy's like damage and health and stuff. So basically that means that all of the problems we used to have, where picking up a gunner drone on floor 1 or 2 was fine, but by stage 4 it was completely worthless, that is at least very thoroughly diminished, and it means a lot for the squid turret only run, which I may have to revisit in the near future. In general, minions feel a lot better, especially when you get the empathy cores and have those extra probes. I was playing engineer, and I had like 5 or 10 drones at the time, and I was noticing the Solace probes ticking with their laser beam for like 600. And that's dramatic. That's a dramatic improvement in the amount of DPS that minions on average have been doing. And granted, that's from a yellow item, but I bet a TC-280 would be a pretty good pick right about now, especially on Captain. I never really liked that drones weren't really that good in Risk 2. They were really strong in Risk 1, partly because the screen space was so much more limited in Risk 1. But I always really enjoyed just having a swarm of drones in the first game. I really liked the backup, and all that. But drones never quite had the punch that they needed, and I'm hoping that this change means that I can like go on a funny engineer run with a bunch of drones, and that would be cool. The next big deal, these commando buffs, are really good. They're so good. I've been trying to get incorruptible on Monsoon lately because I'm a masochist, and so I've been playing a ton of Commando just before this update. And the update to double tap, just the mouse one, is like night and day. It's so good. It's so good to have that 25% fire rate increase and the bloom reset time. Like, it's more accurate, it's more damaging, and it fires faster. It just feels so much better now. It felt so weird and slow before, and now it really, like, Commando never felt good to me previously until you got 2 or 3 syringes in you, and now you just start with those 2 or 3 syringes in you, and it feels so good to play Commando now. I'm really excited to play more Commando in the near future, but I've just been so in on Bandit lately since the update dropped, just because Bandit's such a blast. So fun. And then some other minor buffs to Tactical Dive and Phase Round. Phase Round now deals 40% more damage each time it passes through an enemy. It's probably still going to be less overall useful than Phase Blast, but 40% more of 400% is like a pretty substantial buff. It's like 150% or so extra damage. I'm not good at math. It's like 150% or so extra damage per enemy. And like, you know, like I'm seeing situations theoretically where on the first floor you've got like 2 or 3 beetles and a stone golem, and that phase round will just tap the stone golem. So I probably still won't use phase round, but having phase round be a more viable option rather than just literally just being worse in every scenario is a really nice change. It's really good. Commando in general has always had seemingly the least choice when it comes to alternate skills, because the frag grenade is generally not very popular, and the phase blast is just better than the phase round with the previous numbers. So shaking that up a little bit will be really useful for Commando, and especially Commandos who don't have the Overloading Worm achievement yet, because that one is a bit of a pain. Huntress is now unlocked by default, which is sick. Bandit has her old unlock condition, which is sicker. There's not much else to say. Huntress is cool. Engineer got some minor things I literally didn't notice. I'm an engineer main. I literally didn't even notice. The grenades have a slightly different arc, and it'll probably be easier overall to aim, but I literally didn't notice, so it doesn't really matter. The Artificer nanobomb change is a little bit disappointing, because I really liked that the sparks coming off of the nanobomb could proc bands on their own. It really made it feel like it was a big deal. But I totally understand the change to make them happen twice as often, but do half the damage. If anything, that might make it feel even cooler to just like zap it through a group of wisps and it just goes bah, 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 bah. But I haven't actually put any significant time into Artificer. Speaking of, Artificer, Loader, and Multi all got some significant and some minor. Like, Multi has some pretty minor changes. Loader has some fairly significant changes, and then Artificer's is very different. They all got very significant changes to the mesh of their model. So the actual literal silhouette of Multi's alt skin, Loader's alt skin, and Artificer's alt skin is different. And I really, really love what they did with the Artificer alt skin. I love the little sleeves. I love the tailcoats and the big hood. It all works. It feels really good. I'm a big fan of those changes. Mercenary got a small invincibility on Blinding Assault, which I believe that is the shift. They just got a fifth of a second of invincibility at the end for high latency online games, which is fine. It's not a significant change, but it's probably one that the Mercenary mains will notice. Okay. Now we get into the item changes. Some of these item changes, like these are the reasons I made the video. The item changes are pretty substantial. First, starting strong, Bungus, Bustling Fungus, sickest meme item of all time, genuinely really good now. Having to only stand still for 1 second is such a massive quality of life improvement for the fungus, and then also having the higher tick rate with the lower individual tick size, that I'm pretty sure it's just the same thing that they did to Desk Plant last patch, and that was pretty successful as Desk Plant goes. Like, Desk Plant's still not great, but the improvements that they made to it were pretty dramatic, and now they've also continued that improvement over to Bustling Fungus. And I also really like the new visual effect too. It's sort of reminiscent of the effect of Bustling Fungus from the first game, and I really appreciate that. Energy Drink got a small scaling change. They basically just normalized how much you get per stack, because there was some math weirdness where the first energy drink was better than a goat hoof, but every other one wasn't. So now energy drink is slightly better than the goat hoof in all scenarios, but it only activates when you sprint, so the mileage is variable. Focus Crystal got a 25% damage boost improvement, and big quality of life changes in the form of an actual visible radius to tell whether you are in Focus Crystal range, as well as a different color of number if Focus Crystal is active on a hit. And it really, like they say in the notes, nothing significant changed about Focus Crystal, but it feels a lot more impactful now because you can actually see it. It was kind of hard to tell when Focus Crystal was active before, because there was really just kind of a particle effect on the point of impact for all of your attacks, and like a very small sound effect. You know, it wasn't that dramatic, but now it really feels good. Rusted Key changed entirely. Like, the model changed and all the functionality changed. Rusted Key used to be pretty mediocre, and it still keeps its theme. The theme of Rusted Key has always been, this item is not good, it doesn't do anything, but it represents an investment into further into your run. So now, instead of those lockboxes just being small chests with weighted averages based on how many keys you have, the chest costs a key. So you consume a key in order to open the chest, but it's a large chest, so it has that 80% chance at a green, which is super fine, and then that 20% chance at a red. And with how many rusted keys you get over the course of a run, even just through junk, you will probably find a red from a rusted key at some point within your run, and it's pretty good. It's a pretty good deal. And then also the lockboxes have sort of an amber aura around them that makes them stick out a little more against the terrain, which means it's practical to actually seek them out rather than just kind of stumbling across them like we used to. Let's see. Yeah, okay. That's all of the changes. Crowbar got the extra damage per stack increased by half. I haven't personally tested if this makes any breakpoints different. In my view, Crowbar has always been good. Crowbar is one of those items that's really interesting because it's really bad until it's the best item in the game, because Crowbar only works on essentially the first hit. If something has enough health that you deal less than 10% in the first hit, then you get 2 hits. Congratulations. But Crowbar only really worked on the first hit, and that means that the first one was pretty good, and then afterwards, Crowbar wouldn't really improve your situation that much unless it enabled you to one-shot enemies on the first hit with, like, ceremonial daggers or something, in which case it would be absolutely insane, like the thing that solves your run kind of stuff. And Crowbar will now get there faster, and I think that that's a really important thing, and I'm sure all the loader mains are really happy about this change too. The gasoline change, such a huge deal. I was literally, while I was doing my incorruptible runs, I was literally thinking, man, gasoline is pretty good with the old effect, because Commando's AoE is pretty poor in the early game, and having that gasoline there, even if it's not a Will-o'-the-Wisp or a Ukulele or whatever, was such a huge help, just having that burn damage from the weenies, and now it deals an extra, like they doubled the damage of the gasoline in the form of a big burst of damage at the front rather than changing any of the damage over time. And it means that your gasoline is really just a budget will-o'-the-wisp now with an extra burn at the other end. And that's a pretty big deal. Like, gasoline feels pretty good now. It doesn't scale well because it never has, because it just scales radius. But honestly, scaling radius isn't that bad either. Being able to spread fire around for deathmark and stuff is pretty useful. And there's the ever-present possibility of chain bombing an entire group and getting like 4 or 5 burn stacks on the enemies that are beefy enough to survive it, and then burning them to death and continuing the chain. Like, gasoline is genuinely pretty all right now, and I'm glad to see sort of a more common alternative to Will-O-The-Wisp, because Will-O-The-Wisp is so good for a lot of builds, and you really felt a dramatic change when you picked up your first Will, you know. Fresh meat is gone, thankfully. Fresh meat was always sort of a mid-low tier item at best. It has been replaced with bison steak, and that just gives you health. Stacking health is cool. There's not a lot more to say about it, but it means that your health values can get even more crazy, and 4 of them is equivalent in value to an infusion. And so, like, having that instant extra 25%, or extra 25 flat, I should say, health, and, like, with all of the percent healing that's in the game now, that stacks up pretty quick. And if you survive by 25 or more health from a clutch situation, that is the item coming in handy, you know? Tri-tip dagger, we all knew this was coming. Tri-tip dagger's down to 10% from 15. So it's the same as glasses now. I consider bleed and crit to be basically equal. Like, depending on your character, for example, I'd say Commando, you actually want to prioritize bleed over crit, because Commando fires fast more than he deals a lot of base damage. And for Bandit, I would prioritize crit over bleed, because hemorrhage is so strong, and that applies on crits, and you won't always, like, for example, on bosses, you won't always have the ability to get behind them to deal that guaranteed crit. So having a little bit of extra crit on top for insurance really helps smooth out the process of building up those hemorrhage stacks and just really laying it on. So I find that crit is more useful on Bandit. But either way, they're now basically the same. Tri-tip dagger and glasses are essentially the same. Dagger scales better over time, I would say, because crits have a cap that matters, and I guess bleeds do too, but they stack forever. But yeah, like, basically daggers and glasses are the same item now, and that's okay. They're both really good. I already talked about the stealth kit change. They increased the duration a little bit, and they gave it a cooldown. But other than that, it's just more consistent now. It's not really that big of a deal. Bandolier now restores all charges, even on Maltese unselected weapon, which is just a really nice change. I honestly wish Bandolier would have done this the whole time. Artificer is very happy about this change, because getting all 4 fireballs back from a Bandolier is really nice, especially if you haven't had the opportunity to pick up a Purity yet and get that cooldown really, really low on your mouse one. Really nice change. Another really nice change is Radar Scanner. Radar Scanner is still not that useful. Like, there's a lot of equipments that are more actively useful, but the quality of life improvement of having that Radar Scanner and just seeing, okay, there's a chest, there's a drone, there's a chest, there's a drone, there's a barrel, there's a newt shrine, you know, having the ability to more actively plan out your run and smooth out your looting experience will overall save you time. So, like, like, just picking up a radar scanner in order to pop it once and then just put it back down again is totally viable, and just getting the lay of the land is really useful too. Frost Relic I have not had the opportunity to experiment with, but they doubled its damage and doubled its radius, so it's good. I've heard it's really good. And I bet it's even better on Mercenary than it always has been. But I'm glad to see. I hate reds that don't work well. I hate when you get a red and it's like, whatever. Like Nuka-Hanas without proper support is like that. Desk Plant always is like that. Head Stompers always is like that for me, at least, except for very, very specific situations. So I'm glad to see that they're sort of touching up the less useful reds. And speaking of the Head Stompers, they got a change in how the damage is calculated to make a little bit more sense. Probably still not worth using, but the no fall damage is pretty good still. Resonance Disc got a bit of change in the logic. Doesn't really matter that much. Defiant Gouge spawns less monsters, and I've actually been experimenting with this lately, and I really feel it. Defiant Gouge used to be that it was really good early on because spawning extra enemies sounds like a downside, but it's really not, because spawning extra enemies means that you get to kill those enemies and they get to drop money, especially like the Shrines of Combat, which the Defiant Gouge emulates. The Shrines of Combat really like to spawn elites, and so if you get a high tier enemy type, and you get a couple elites, especially early on in a run, that can save you a ton of time running around looking for enemies. Like, even in Monsoon, you'll still occasionally have these times where there's 15 or 20 seconds of time where nothing is spawning. And having the Defiant Gouge to smooth out that spawn curve is really useful. But the problem was, when you got to later stages, like stage 5, you activate a Shrine of Chance, you get a Malachite Mushroom or 2, and it's not good. It's really, really bad. So having that monster spawn point reduction on Defiant Gouge means that you're getting a lot less of that really nasty, spiky damage in the late game from Defiant Gouge's effect. Oh, okay. Big mechanical change. Focus Convergence, Lepton Daisy, and other things that affect the teleporter event potentially in the future now work in all holdout zones, quote-unquote holdout zones, which is to say the teleporter event, obviously, the void fields, which is really, really important for focus convergence. Having even one focus convergence in the void fields reduces the amount of time you spend in the cell dramatically. And then Lepton Daisy. I don't know if I already mentioned Lepton Daisy, but Lepton Daisy also works in the void fields, and that is a pretty big change. Lepton Daisy working in the void fields is a pretty big deal because the void fields, at least the method that I use for the void fields, where you go there in between stage 1 and 2, you're really hurting for healing items there. And Lepton Daisy is a pretty low-tier healing item, all things considered, but any healing at all is really useful in the void fields. And so having Lepton Daisy there as an extra layer of insurance and having to stand around a little less to regenerate health between nodes is really, really nice. That change, I really, really like that change. And then the other, there are also several holdout zones on the final stage. So you'll need to keep that in mind if you plan on going for a Mythic kill on your run from now on. They changed the Halcyon Seed, which is the Aurelionite yellow item. I am not sure exactly what changed, but it's fine. Aurelionite has always been fine. It looks like, it looks like they changed the way the HP scales, so it'll probably be a little bit tankier from now on, and it'll focus on smaller enemies less, those are both nice changes. I doubt Aurelionite will go too much higher on any given item tier list as a result of these changes, but it's always nice to see these like middling or lower tier items getting changes. And speaking of lower tier items getting changes, this patch note could have been the only patch note in the patch, and I would have been happy. Mired Urn is no longer capable of targeting allies. This was not super important for a lot of people, because a lot of people don't play this game multiplayer, but I play this game multiplayer quite a lot, and Mired Urn was literally the only item in the game that we would not pick up, because Mired Urn targeting your allies and slowing them, like not even the damage, just the slow, is just such a nightmare. And having the ability to actually pick up Mired Urn and not actively hurt your friends is really, really, really good and so nice. It's such a load off my back to just be able to pick up the item, because My Ardorn is a really fun item too. So I've been having a lot of fun experimenting with that. Some pretty substantial Hermit Crab changes. They rolled all of the projectiles into a single projectile now and added a trail renderer, so it's a little easier to see. And it means that Hermit Crabs feel a lot more impactful now. Hermit Crabs previously were a bit of a threat, but they never really had consistent damage. They were more of an annoyance than anything else. And now the newer Hermit Crabs feel a lot more impactful when they actually hit you, and it feels like you can see when they're about to hit you a lot better. The readability in general of the Hermit Crab has been improved a lot, and it's like it makes me notice them. I didn't really notice Hermit Crabs that actively before, unless I saw the splash, and now it feels like Hermit Crabs are something I have to actively keep tabs on, and that's a pretty good change. Parents got really, really significant health decreases. This happened last patch too. Parents have always been like really, really, really tanky. They've been some of the highest HP enemy types in the game. And so bumping it down from 900 to around 600 base health with around 180 instead of 270 per level, that feels appropriate. The parents also got a minor visual update. They added like little spots on the arms, and they sort of defined the hoop of their face a little bit more. They look a lot closer to their Risk 1 design. There's a lot of very subtle visual model changes in this update for like items and enemies and stuff, and they all look super, super good. I don't think I've seen a change so far, other than like some of my friends don't like the new squid polyp, but other than that, literally none of the changes are bad. I like all of them, and I'm really impressed with all of them. But yeah, elite parents were just walls. You had to throw so many bullets into them. So having the health nerf will be pretty nice, especially later on in loops. Gritter Wisps can now be stunned and frozen. Doesn't really matter that much. Stunning them out of their rocket attack is now an option, and that will make commandos happy, and that will make anyone with stun grenades happy. But all in all, not a substantial change. Oh yeah, okay. I mentioned before that the Lunar Chimeras have changed in functionality, and I'm really the Wisp changes are not very substantial. The tracking bomb, sort of the vagrant-like attack that would just instantly mulch you, is now a little bit less nasty. It does 16% less damage, I think, and moves a little bit slower. The really big change, though, is the Golem-type Lunar Chimeras. They previously had, like, this big charge attack that would throw a wave at you of 4 projectiles. Now they sort of charge up and they fire, like, a subsequent, like, missile volley at you. And each individual shot does less damage than it used to, but the splash damage combined with the semi-random movement patterns combined with the frequency of golem spawns means that pretty quickly they can sort of pile onto you, and especially in the Mithrix fight, which, by the way, now includes those explodey guys in the ad phase in the middle of the fight, if you're not aware, which adds quite a lot of chaos to that part of the fight. The golems can really easily burst you down now with the rapid fire, especially in the Mithrix fight when you're also having to worry about the boss. Okay. Beetle Queen now summons Beetle Guards instead of Beetles. It's not that big of a deal. Beetle Guards are only slightly harder to deal with than Beetles, but it feels more substantial to have the boss summon enemies that are like higher level than the current floor on like stage 1. It feels right. Scavengers now properly spawn as elites. Okay, so they had the health and damage buff, but they didn't have the effect before, and now they do. And that scares me. It's a scavenger. Scavengers suck. But it's not a huge deal. They're going to do the same damage, and that's what really matters. I guess the burning matters a lot, as well as the overloading, but that's true of most enemies, so. Minor changes to the way the Void Reaver spaces its bombs. They increased. That looks like increased. They increased the base health of the final phase of the final boss. But they changed the way it returns items, and they changed the way they added a stagger state on high damage. So in practice, it doesn't. It actually feels like he has lower health. I thought they nerfed the health, but they actually buffed it. It's not. It's not that bad. The final stage after the patch has never been too bad. Like after the post 1.0 patch has never been too bad, but the new final boss last phase feels a lot easier in my view. But maybe that's just because we're used to it. We're used to it. When they say they altered the stage layout of Wetland Aspect to add more identifiable landmark areas, I literally don't know what they're talking about. I was already used to the layout of Wetland Aspect, so I have not noticed a significant difference. Maybe for those of us who are less experienced with Wetland Aspect specifically, the changes are more noticeable, but I literally didn't notice any part of Wetland Aspect changing dramatically at all. Okay, let's see. Okay. In the quality of life section, they added an item color or team colored area indicators for attacks from a bunch of different enemy types. This isn't that big of a change overall. It means that most of the time, just the AoEs are going to look a little weird because they're red, but that's really good for Wake of Vultures. Because previously, if you killed a Malachite enemy with Wake of Vultures, the Malachite urchins that you spawned and the Malachite urchins that the enemy spawned would look exactly the same. And that means that you would be avoiding things that you didn't have to. And so having that extra level of visual clarity, as well as that extra level of visual clarity for things like the Beetle Guards and the Aurelianite, really, really nice subtle change there. They updated the visuals for drones and chests and equipment barrels and a bunch of items. All of those changes look pretty good. It's just a little bit more detailed. The differences are pretty subtle, but they all look a lot more complete. It feels a lot less early access for a lot of these touched up models, and it feels like they really did just go back in and like look at all of them, and they were like, this looks a little bad. Let's see what we can do to it. All of the changes look pretty good. They added a smoke particle to all broken drones and turrets and stuff, as well as coloring them gray when they're not active, which makes it a lot easier to see them. And that is a pretty significant change. It also means that they're harder to confuse with pills, like a healing drone on its side, like that little bit of blue on the side would look a little bit like a pill, and now there's a little bit more of a visual distinction between them at distance. But yeah, it looks like those are all of the really important changes and a lot of the really unimportant changes from the patch notes, and sort of my thoughts on them. I think this patch was really, really good. Oh, I need to talk about Bandit. Bandit's so fun. Bandit's a blast. Bandit was my favorite character from the first game. Conceptually, I actually didn't play much of him. I played a lot of Commando in Risk 1. But Bandit was my favorite character conceptually in Risk 1. And he's translated so perfectly over into Risk 2. I am continually amazed at the talent that Hopoo Games just regularly demonstrates with, like, adapting design. Like, the way they adapted Risk 1's design into 3D is almost flawless. Like, the way they redesigned all of the returning characters is almost flawless. It's just so good. And Bandit is not even close to an exception. The main mechanic that was always super fun on Bandit was Lights Out, where it resets its cooldown if you kill something with it. Now it resets all of your cooldowns if you kill something with it. So I've had times where, because the smoke grenade like pops you up on the way in and the way out, I would have times where I was using Lights Out to reset my smoke bomb cooldown in midair off of wisps, and I was using that to gain a bunch of extra height, and I could essentially fly as long as I could keep the chain going. And that sort of stuff feels really, really, really cool. I have a clip in my instant replay somewhere of like 12 or 13 resets in a row just from a bunch of wisps and Lemurians and beetles and stuff. It just feels so good to like point at a small enemy and go bap, 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 you know? And it resets the cooldown on your mouse too, which is like one of the most ridiculous, insane burst damage, ridiculous things in the whole game. Hemorrhage does 2,000% damage. Are you freaking serious on a character with a guaranteed crits from behind and a 500% on the standard attack without any fall off? It's so good. It's such a good skill. And I'm really excited to get the alternate version, but getting 20 stacks of hemorrhage on an enemy is difficult, not because it's hard to actually get there, but just because things don't survive that long. And Bandit in general, like, he's this really great mix between a marksman archetype, like a snipery kind of vibe, as well as like incorporating a lot of rogue mechanics, you know, like rogue archetypal mechanics, with the smoke bomb and the crits from behind, like smoke bombing behind a guy to pop out with a backstab and like stun them, apply hemorrhage and get a guaranteed crit, and then like bop 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 bop, the 4 shots into their back, and then the revolver, it just does so much damage. Feels so good. And like, the early game boss damage is dramatic. I've never had any issues with Bandit's early game. The way that the spread shot works, where like you can mash it to spread it out, or you can click every once in a while to keep it pretty accurate, means that you can dynamically choose whether you want to fan it out to deal with larger groups, and that makes it really dynamic. The alternate mouse one having absolutely no fall off that I notice anyway is really, really nice. It really gives it that nice marksman rifle feel where you just see a wisp in the distance and you know, okay, I can bop, you know. It's Bandit is just incredible. I'm like, every character in this game feels so good, and I usually hate playing rogues. I never really play rogue archetypes in any game. I find that their playstyle is just a little bit tricky for me to get a handle on, and I never really have too much fun with it. But Bandit feels so good to use, and there's so much weird little stuff you can do with him because the smoke bomb pops you up on the way in and the way out, so you can do this thing where you use shift and then immediately right click to get like a double jump essentially, or a triple jump depending on how you want to use it. Bandit just feels so good. It's just so nice. This patch surprised me in a way that I was not really expecting. I was really excited for Bandit because he was one of my favorites, but the amount of polish that I didn't realize this game didn't have is dramatic. And the ways that they chose to solve the design problems that they were presented with down at Hopoo were really, really smart. And the developers in general just have a really good idea of how they want their game to be played and how they like what is fun about it. And I think that's something that's really exceptional about the Hopoo Games team. Either way, this has been a bit rambly. This is not quite something I usually do, but if you enjoyed your time, I would appreciate it if you'd leave a like below the video, maybe hit that subscribe button, ring the notification bell, all those things that YouTubers tell you to do. It'd let me know I'm doing a good job, and I would very much appreciate it if you stay around, maybe watch a couple other videos. I have a couple novelty runs. I have a razor wire only run and a squid turret run that I mentioned in this video. You can find both of those down on my channel. But either way, thank you for spending this time with me, and I'll see you around sometime.